So, do you have Neanderthal DNA? The short answer is almost certainly yes. If your ancestors came from anywhere outside of sub-Saharan Africa, you have Neanderthal DNA in you. Right now. It's a small amount, usually between 1 and 4%. It's not enough to change how you look, but it's there. It's a quiet echo from a very, very long time ago. This is a pretty new discovery. For a long time, we saw Neanderthals as a totally separate species, a dead end. They were the brutish, clumsy cavemen from the museum dioramas. They lived, they struggled, and then they disappeared. Our own species, Homo sapiens, showed up and replaced them. That was the story. But DNA changed that story completely. It turns out the line between us and them wasn't so clear. We didn't just replace them, we met them, and we had children with them. To really get this, we have to go back. Way back. Who were the Neanderthals? They were not our direct ancestors, they were more like our cousins. Our evolutionary path split a long time ago, maybe around 500,000 years ago. Our common ancestor lived in Africa. One group of these early humans stayed in Africa and eventually evolved into us, Homo sapiens. Another group left Africa and headed for Europe and Asia. This group evolved into the Neanderthals. So for hundreds of thousands of years, we grew up in different neighborhoods. The Neanderthals adapted to the cold, tough climates of Ice Age Europe. They were shorter and stockier than us. They had broad chests, strong bones, and a distinctive brow ridge. Their brains were actually a bit larger than ours on average, though the shape was different. And they were not dumb brutes. That's a cartoon version of them. They were incredibly sophisticated survivors. They made complex stone tools. They were expert hunters who could take down mammoths and woolly rhinos. They controlled fire. They lived in small family groups. They probably cared for their sick and elderly. We found Neanderthal skeletons with healed injuries that would have been impossible to survive alone. Someone was looking after them. Some evidence suggests they even buried their dead, maybe with flowers or other offerings. They had a complex life. They were people. For a very long time, they had Europe and Asia mostly to themselves. But then around 60,000 years ago, another group of humans started moving out of Africa. This was us, modern Homo sapiens. This is where the story gets interesting. For the first time in a very long time, two different kinds of humans were living in the same place. Imagine our ancestors adapted to the warm plains of Africa, moving into the colder, darker forests of Europe. They would have encountered plants and animals they'd never seen before, and they would have encountered people they'd never seen before. People who had been living there for 200,000 years. What happened when they met? For decades, scientists debated this. Was it war? Did we wipe them out? Was it simple competition? Did we just out-hunt them and outbreed them, or was it something else? The answer was locked away in our own cells. In our DNA. The challenge was getting DNA from a Neanderthal. DNA is a fragile molecule. When an organism dies, its DNA starts to break down. After thousands of years in the ground, it's a mess. It's shattered into tiny pieces. It's also contaminated. Most of the DNA you find in an ancient bone isn't from the bone itself. It's from bacteria, from fungi, from the people who excavated it, from the people in the lab studying it. Getting a clean sample of Neanderthal DNA was considered almost impossible. It was like trying to reassemble a single shredded book from a library that had been flooded and filled with garbage. But a team of scientists led by a man named Svante Pabo decided to try anyway. They spent years developing new, ultra-clean methods to extract and piece together ancient DNA. They used dental drills to get at the uncontaminated powder inside ancient bones. They worked in clean rooms like you see in computer chip factories to avoid contamination. Slowly, painstakingly, they did it. They stitched together the fragments. They rebuilt the Neanderthal genetic code. In 2010, they published the first draft of the Neanderthal genome. This was a huge moment. It was like finding a user manual for a long-lost type of human. But the most shocking part came when they compared the Neanderthal genome to ours. They looked at the DNA of people from all over the world. They compared a person from China, a person from France, a person from Papua New Guinea. And they found Neanderthal gene variants in all of them. But when they looked at the DNA of people from sub-Saharan Africa, people whose ancestors had never left the continent, the Neanderthal DNA was missing. The conclusion was unavoidable. The interbreeding didn't happen in Africa. It happened after Homo sapiens left Africa. As our ancestors moved into the Middle East, into Asia, into Europe, they met the Neanderthals who were already living there. And they didn't just fight or compete. They also saw each other as partners. They had children. Those children were hybrids, part Homo sapiens, part Neanderthal. And those children went on to have their own children, passing those Neanderthal genes down through the generations, all the way down to us. So, what does this 1 to 4% of DNA actually do? Is it just silent junk, a souvenir from the past? Not at all. The DNA we kept from them wasn't random. Natural selection was at play. Think about it. When our ancestors arrived in Europe and Asia, they were entering a whole new world. New climates, new foods, and most importantly, new diseases, new bacteria and viruses they had no defense against. But the Neanderthals had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years. Their immune systems were already adapted to those local germs. When humans and Neanderthals had children, those hybrid kids inherited 2 sets of immune system genes. 1 set from their human parent adapted to African diseases. 1 set from their Neanderthal parent adapted to European or Asian diseases. This gave them a huge advantage. They were better equipped to fight off local infections. And so, those Neanderthal immune genes were incredibly successful. They spread like wildfire through the human population. Today, many of us carry Neanderthal genes related to our immune system, specifically a group of genes called HLAs, which are a critical part of how our bodies recognize and fight off pathogens. That part of your immune system is a direct gift from your Neanderthal ancestors. It helped your ancestors survive. It wasn't just about disease. Neanderthal DNA also seems to have helped humans adapt to life outside the tropics. We find Neanderthal genes that influence our skin and hair. These are genes involved in making keratin, the protein that makes up our skin, hair, and nails. This makes perfect sense. Lighter skin is better at producing vitamin D in regions with less sunlight. Thicker skin or different types of hair could have provided better insulation against the cold. When our African ancestors moved north, they were faced with less sun and more cold. Interbreeding with Neanderthals gave them a shortcut. They could borrow genes that were already proven to work in that environment instead of waiting thousands of years to evolve them from scratch. It was an evolutionary cheat code. So, in many ways, this Neanderthal inheritance was a good thing. It helped us adapt and survive in a new world. But there's a flip side. Our world is not the world of the Ice Age. The genes that helped a hunter-gatherer 50,000 years ago are not always helpful for a person living in a modern city. This is called an evolutionary mismatch, and we see it with some of our Neanderthal DNA. For example, some Neanderthal genes we carry are associated with an increased risk for certain modern health problems. There are links to type 2 diabetes, lupus, Crohn's disease, and even allergies. An immune system on high alert might have been great for fighting off parasites in a cave, but in our modern hyper-clean environment, it might overreact to harmless things like pollen, leading to allergies. Some genes that might have helped with faster blood clotting, a useful trait when you're a hunter who might get injured, are now linked to an increased risk of strokes and heart attacks in modern people who live much longer and have different diets. There are even links to our brains and behavior. One Neanderthal gene variant has been linked to a greater likelihood of feeling lonely or depressed. Another is associated with nicotine addiction. It's impossible to know why these genes were useful in the past. Maybe a gene that makes you a bit more prone to anxiety also made you more cautious and more likely to survive a dangerous hunt. In a modern context, that same gene just contributes to a mental health issue. It's important not to overstate this. Having a particular Neanderthal gene doesn't mean you will get a certain disease. It just slightly increases your risk. Your health is a complex mix of thousands of genes, your environment, and your lifestyle. But it's fascinating to think that some of our modern vulnerabilities are echoes of an ancient encounter between 2 different kinds of people. There's another side to the story. We've talked about the Neanderthal DNA we kept. But what about the DNA we didn't keep? When scientists look at the human genome, they find that the Neanderthal segments are not spread out evenly. There are large stretches of our DNA that are total Neanderthal deserts, areas where there is absolutely no Neanderthal contribution at all. This tells us something important. It suggests that there were some Neanderthal genes that were actively harmful to the hybrid offspring. Natural selection weeded them out. Where are these deserts? Many of them are in the parts of our genome that are most active in the brain and in the male reproductive system. The part about the brain is fascinating. It suggests that the genes responsible for how our brains develop and function were a key part of what made us different from Neanderthals. Maybe our genes gave us advantages in language and abstract thought, in social networking, or in creativity. When a hybrid child inherited a Neanderthal version of one of these critical brain genes, it might have been a disadvantage. Over generations, the human versions of these genes won out. It points to the idea that our unique cognitive abilities were a powerful evolutionary force. The part about the male reproductive system, specifically the X chromosome, is also revealing. Our the 10th chromosome has very little Neanderthal DNA. This hints at something called hybrid infertility. This is a common phenomenon in nature. When two closely related but distinct species interbreed, their offspring are often infertile. The classic example is a horse and a donkey. They can have a child, a mule, but mules are almost always sterile. Something similar might have been happening with humans and Neanderthals. The genetic mismatch might have been particularly bad for hybrid males. Perhaps many of the male children from these pairings were less fertile, or not fertile at all. This would mean that Neanderthal genes passed down on the male sex chromosomes had a harder time making it to the next generation. It might not have been a total barrier, but it was a hurdle. It reminds us that while we were close enough to have children, we were still biologically different. So what happens to the Neanderthals in the end? Why did they disappear? The old story was that we, the smart and superior Homo sapiens, showed up and simply killed them all. The new evidence paints a more complicated and, I think, a more interesting picture. They didn't just vanish overnight. They faded away over thousands of years. It was likely a combination of factors. Climate change was probably a big one. The Ice Age wasn't a constant deep freeze. The climate was highly unstable, swinging from cold to warm and back again. These rapid changes would have put immense pressure on Neanderthal populations, whose hunting strategies were tuned to a specific environment. Competition with us was also a factor. Modern humans were arriving in greater numbers. We may have had slightly better technology, more complex social networks that allowed for trade and support, or a more flexible diet. Even a small advantage, compounded over hundreds of generations, can make a huge difference. We may have just slowly squeezed them out. And then there's the interbreeding itself. This is the most surprising part of their extinction story. They didn't just die out. In a way, they were absorbed. Imagine small, scattered groups of Neanderthals. And then a much larger wave of modern humans moves into the territory. They interbreed. But because there are so many more humans, the Neanderthal DNA gets diluted in each generation. After a few thousand years, there are no poor Neanderthals left, but their DNA hasn't vanished. It's just been incorporated into the larger human gene pool. So their story is not one of simple extinction. It's also a story of assimilation. They live on, in a fragmented way, inside billions of people today. We carry their legacy. We are their descendants, just as much as we are the descendants of those early Homo sapiens from Africa. And the story has gotten even more complex. While scientists were studying the Neanderthal bones from Europe, they also looked at a tiny finger bone found in a cave in Siberia called Denisova Cave. They didn't know what it was from. It looked human, but they couldn't be sure. They managed to get DNA from it, and it was a shock. The DNA didn't match modern humans, and it didn't match Neanderthals. It was something new. A third type of human, now called the Denisovans. They were a sister group to the Neanderthals. Their ancestors had also split from ours long ago and moved into Asia. Just like with Neanderthals, scientists compared the Denisovan genome to modern humans. And they found it. Traces of Denisovan DNA exist in people today. It's particularly common in populations in Melanesia, places like Papua New Guinea and Australia, where people can have up to 6% Denisovan DNA. It's also found in smaller amounts across Asia. This means our ancestors didn't just meet and mix with Neanderthals. They met and mixed with multiple groups of ancient humans as they spread across the globe. The ancient world was not empty. It was a Lord of the Rings world, populated by different kinds of people. And we, Homo sapiens, were just one of them. We interacted with them, we learned from them, and we had families with them. Over time, we were the only ones left. But we carry the ghosts of those other peoples within us. What does all this mean for how we see ourselves? For one thing, it demolishes the idea of racial purity. No one is pure. Most of humanity is a mix, a hybrid of different ancient lineages. The idea of a clean, branching tree of human evolution is wrong. It was more like a tangled, braided stream. Our own species is the result of that mixing. It also changes our relationship with the deep past. The Neanderthals are not just a strange, extinct other. They are part of our story. They are family. When you feel a chill and your skin gets goosebumps, the reflex is controlled by a tiny muscle attached to each hair follicle. The gene that controls that muscle, for many of us, came from a Neanderthal. When your body fights off a cold, some of the tools it uses were passed down from them. They're not gone. A small piece of them is reading these words right now. The science is still young. Every year we get better at sequencing ancient DNA. We are finding more bones from more places. Each new genome adds another layer to the story, making it richer and more complex. We are learning about other interbreeding events, other lost populations. We are starting to understand exactly what we got from these ancient relatives, both the good and the bad. It's a humbling story. It shows us that we are not the inevitable triumphant peak of evolution. We are one branch of a complicated family, and we are lucky to be here. We are a product of survival, of adaptation, of competition, and of love between people who were different, but not so different after all. So yes, you have Neanderthal DNA. You also have the DNA of those first modern humans who walked out of Africa. You have the DNA of countless ancestors who survived ice ages, famines, and migrations. Your DNA is a living history book, and one of its earliest, most surprising chapters was written when one of your ancestors met a different kind of human in a world that no longer exists and saw them not as an enemy but as a person.